Um, so yeah, hello and welcome to everybody. Thanks for being here today. We're super excited to present today's today's identity security training. This is a brand new session for us. Really building on some of the basics that we've covered in our cybersecurity training sessions and branching out more into the actual user identity and some new angles that are being targeted by hackers. A bit about me. My name is Ty Hedden. I'm one of the VCIOs here at Smart Dolphins. I've been with the company about 13 years now, I think close to 14. And my job is really long-term guidance and planning for our clients. Smart Dolphins itself is a managed IT service company based in Victoria, but we service businesses all up the island and on the mainland as well. We provide basically everything from like day-to-day support desk for when like Outlook won't open and somebody needs to fix that, right up to major projects and proactive work, making sure that things are running the way they should, monitoring, and basically everything in between. And we're always looking to just serve our clients and the broader business community better. It's with that goal in mind that we have brought you today's session. And we also want to touch on some upcoming training as well. This is just a couple. We have many listed at smartdolphins.com/training. But in the next little bit, we have Excel Beyond the Basics coming up, always a popular session to brush up on our Excel skills. And we have our cybersecurity user level training. This is a monthly recurring session just to get people up to date on the basics of different threats that are out there, different phishing campaigns. This is always changing and the content adapts to stay up to date. A really good session that you can send like new employees to as you hire them through the year, or even older staff that might not have joined us for that session before. And a couple quick notes on just Zoom etiquette. If you could just mute yourself during the session, that's fantastic. If you do have a question, enter it into the chat and I'll do my best to answer it on the spot. And otherwise we'll queue them up for our Q&A time at the end of the session. You'll also receive a link to the recording of today's session if you didn't notice a little recording notification, as well as a quick feedback survey, which is super helpful for us just to know that our content is helpful, or if there's anything that we could be diving deeper on or adding. With all of that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our guest instructor, Sonya. Sonya Goulet is the president of Infinity Cyber, an international cybersecurity educator, innovator, and strategist. Sonya has worked with the National Guard, the U.S. State of Homeland Security, Michigan State Police, and many more. She has dedicated her career to helping cybersecurity professionals to better detect and prevent cyber attacks in real-world settings, and is now focusing on educating employees on safe online business practices. Sonya joins us from her home today in High River.
Awesome. Thank you, Ty. Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you taking some time out today to join us. I want to make this as valuable for you as possible, but I also want to make it interactive. I know some of these concepts are confusing. In the world of our little cybersecurity world, there is nothing but acronyms and it's hard to understand and how to break it down. And then the constant bombardment of the news and the threat landscape out there, it's really hard to determine what is relevant to you, your workday, and everything else that you do. So I want to be able to inform you, but I would also like us to engage. So please keep in mind, we want to leave a little bit of a time at the end to be able to talk about some of these concepts, talk about ways you can take this from today to your workplace, and what would those steps look like, and what would you need to do to be able to be somewhat an agent of change, I guess. Today's session is to inform you, but also to give you that knowledge so you can say, okay, I understand what I can do, and then help you take those steps to do that. Today, we want to make sure you understand it isn't only just about knowledge, because when it comes to cybersecurity, it also means implementing and changing some of our current behavior based on the trends that are happening. So we'll cover today what it is, identity security. We'll talk about the modern work that makes your staff, you as a staff member, a target to hackers. We'll talk about some of the laws out there that are relevant to your workplace, whether you're working in law or you follow compliance strictly due to your work or your type of work. We'll talk about that today because that's constantly changing as well. We'll talk about those layers of authentication and authorization that's going to make your workload easier and protect it based on following certain guidelines. And then we'll talk about, here's some more acronyms, MFA and SSO. So what is that? Multi-factor authentication and single sign-on. So there you go. So we're going to have to break down some of these concepts because they're constantly in our face. So what is identity security? So it's a proactive strategy that helps us focus on protecting the user, which is you, we'll call you an end user or a user, and the computer. The authentication and authorization. So you will all work on a computer. You have one authorized device that you log in to do your work every day. So we want to be able to ensure that you as a staff member for your organization have the right access to the systems to do your job. Now, since we had the last couple of years, we allowed our staff to work from home. And so our ease of access into all of the operating systems that we've used or software or cloud-based products, applications have become very easy to use for us because we had to do our job outside of an office and we had to do it promptly. We couldn't have any slow down time based on access to any software. So we pivoted really quickly to that, and that wasn't an issue. We could do that, but we also didn't think about the other kind of fallout that has occurred in the last couple of years. And we're seeing it pretty dramatically that is changing our work landscape even more because of this. So we want to now talk about your identity security because in the workplace, that's essentially what's at risk. So you are the human in this organization that has an identity, and we now have to talk about how we give you access to what you do at your workplace and how we protect that privileged access. So the documents you touch, the files that you store, and the documents you transfer, all of this, and then how you log into your device, what devices you actually use. Are you allowed to use any device for work, or are there only specific devices? And it's all these questions that are important to ask because in the last couple of years, we may not have considered how serious it was, what device someone worked on. We're like, oh, just use your home computer, log in, you're fine. And you can just log in this way. And we gave access without serious consideration to the security layers around what we did for our work. So our data and our work are both are very vulnerable in today's climate because what's happening is we now have a different type of attack happening or threat happening to you as an individual and your organization, regardless of the size of your organization. So we now have to look at this and approach how we are going to work every day with a little bit of a different lens. And what used to work a year ago actually won't work anymore. And it's becoming prevalent amongst security practitioners of how aggressively we have to change and pivot again. But it is costly, obviously, as you know, business expenses that you wouldn't have considered as a company or a staff, and the inconvenience that you wouldn't have considered as a staff or a manager or a CEO of the size of organization you are. So all of this comes with a little bit of an inconvenience to have to look at. However, the threat landscape has become so vast and it has come knocking at every door of every size of organization in the last year that we are now forced to pay attention. And if we don't pay attention, that will cost us dearly. So we want you to know that we want to start with how we can talk about you and the identity and the cost of that to an organization. So right now, what we're finding, and these stats constantly change, so I'm just going to give you some stats, that a significant percentage of breaches are caused by compromising the employee's corporate identity. So that means you. Doesn't matter again. But we are global, because just like you think you can take your laptop and you can go sit in Hawaii and work in a hotel from Hawaii next week and not think twice about it, you have a connected device to your home, your company's software. So when you think about the ease of access that you can go work in Hawaii for a week to do your work, you have to realize hackers also have that access. And that access means we're all interconnected because we're now digital. So we aren't using file cabinets to put files, HR records, financial records, budget records. We aren't using filing cabinets. So we have to think differently as we are in this digital landscape. And because we can access these all the software, all the data, all the client records, all the private records, whatever documents you touch, you can access them from anywhere in the world on the device you work from. That means you're essentially having to look at how you interact with that information. These criminal groups have years of experience. They are really competent. They're getting more and more sophisticated as the days go on. So we have not only like the individual hackers, but these ransomware attacks are done by sophisticated groups. We call them gangs, and they're very sophisticated. They're sometimes even sponsored by nation states. So the Chinas, the Russias, and I hate to say it, but it's true. It is those countries that are attacking North America's companies because we're digital. We have gotten so advanced in our abilities and capabilities to work online that we have put everything digital so quickly because we could afford this. We have access to the Office 365 with ease of use and no questions asked. Just log in, use your creds, and you're in. But these hackers know this. They're not, these other countries aren't as digital, so they're not as risk as us, but they now know we are a perfect target. And so they're sitting in their country and they can find ways to get into our networks. And one of them is through you as an employee. So we have to look at what are they doing and how are they doing it? And we have to care about that now because they're breaking into our systems. We don't have the brick and mortar where, your door would be busted down and then your building would be compromised. And then your filing cabinets with your records would be compromised. No, it's a bigger picture now. Your parameters changed and we now have to look at it. So when you're looking at 80% of hacker-related breaches are due to weak, compromised credentials. That means you have a username, like my name is Sonya Goulet, so username S-Goulet, and then maybe my password or my email, right? So those are my credentials, and those could be found perhaps pretty easy if I have easy credentials that are posted. Maybe I have it on my company website. Maybe I have it on LinkedIn. I mean, honestly, we want to be so, let's say, public nowadays. We put all of our information out online for everyone to see, thinking it's for the good. But what we don't realize, it's also easy for these hackers to just glean this information from these public-facing websites or social media sites. So that is a high number. And it's only going to increase. Then 100 is the number of passwords that an average person has. So you think about the accounts, whether it's your, Netflix account, your Amazon account, your FedEx account, and then your work accounts that you would have, let's say Office 365, you would have other vendor accounts that are linked to that so that you would have HR accounts that you could use, maybe Bamboo or Sage, accounting software. The list goes on and on. But you see what I'm saying is you have to have a password for all of those. So you have 100 accounts. That's a lot. And then when a company does get breached, it's going to over 287 days before that company even recognizes that. And I'm talking, we have huge companies that have been in the news that actually have been breached and admit the breach occurred months before they recognize it. Very sophisticated companies like Cisco or like, SolarWinds you heard about. if you haven't heard about SolarWinds was a really big one because that stumped the whole industry because it wasn't recognized for a very long time, and the hackers did incredible damage inside that company's network. So that means that happens to all sides of companies because we're all vulnerable. Every organization, and I mean every organization, has the same vulnerabilities. We're all digital, we all use cloud products, and we all log on from different devices, from different locations. So we have a lot of challenges before us to be able to combat as we need to work effectively and protect our client data and our own data. So interesting stat that I got just recently, because I follow lots of different US and Canadian agencies that track criminal activity. And obviously ransomware is a huge, getting huge traction, huge headlines, but also when it comes to law enforcement, they have to track it because it's costing companies hundreds of thousands of dollars, but costing our country millions of dollars because of the breaches that are occurring. So last year, you will see the very bottom line, it says BEC, business email compromise. That means you have a business email. That is the largest part of that pie that has been compromised in the last year under the FBI cyber division. They were able to track this, and that was one category they tracked to say, this is one of our hugest concerns that is causing a lot of cybersecurity incidences. And the highest targets are healthcare, in 2022, healthcare, public school sectors, and financial sectors. Now that's just right now. I'm going to tell you that's going to change, and it's going to change quickly. It's based on where are the biggest vulnerabilities, or, let's say less secure organizations. And those are the ones right now. So you will see, if you look up Ontario public school system, they had a massive attack and they had shut down their systems, and it was a ransomware attack. And that attack they weren't prepared for that attack at all. And they wouldn't have even thought that they should have been attacked. We're just a public school system. We just put grades and we just have student ID. And they wouldn't have probably considered the security measures they needed for all their staff and all of their data. And yet they got compromised. So what I'm trying to tell you is everything you touch is valuable. And we need to tell you in the day-to-day business that you do, you are now needing to be that perimeter of protection. We'll call you a human firewall. So because you have access to tens of thousands of files every day, you have data that is very desirable. Now, think about what data you touch every day. So, Red, what do you touch? Do you touch financial records? Do you touch client data? Do you touch, human resources, company private data that would not want to be out in the public? You do have valuable data in your organization. You just might not have considered how valuable it is. And I'm telling you, it is very valuable because that digital data now is what can be sold for money on the marketplace, the dark web. So you have to look at this and go, okay, I have all my staff touching hundreds of thousands of documents and storing files and transferring them. What are we equipping them with to be able to do this securely? We want to consider and not take it lightly. Do they know what they're responsible for? Because they have to know if it's confidential data and they touch it, how does that, what permission do they have to do with that, right? Because that means your organization has to consider where that privilege is for that person, where that access is for that permission for that person, because we don't want that person to have a vulnerability in the way they access that data and then it get compromised for them. So we have a lot of considerations for each and every staff member on your team. And they should know what they're responsible for. It's just like when you're playing on let's say a basketball team. Everyone knows their role on the team and they don't go outside of that lane, right? So they will play that position through the whole game, and then get pulled off and someone will replace them to help them continue that flow of that game. Each individual in your organization has a role, and that role is critical, whether you're HR manager or HR, let's say coordinator, or you're the CFO when you manage all the budgets and the money and the accounting. That role is critical in keeping that organization moving forward. But it could be put to a stop if you aren't protecting that data, because the access is also shared with people that shouldn't have authorization to that. So we have to make sure we have lots of checklists given in your organization so that these individuals have the right access to the right files for the right duration of time. And that could be all sorts of different layers, and it takes time. I understand that, but it's important that you consider that this is now a way to mitigate your risk by having each of your staff members have the access to the data that only they need to have access to. So what's happened also on the flip side of, let's say, the laws, the data that you touch. So if you're going to say you're going to touch credit card data, there's laws in place, PCI compliance laws that are in place that we have to adhere to no matter what agency you are. But if you use credit cards and your clients use credit cards and you save or whatever transactions through credit cards, you have to follow that law. And so there's all sorts of regulations around that. If you don't adhere to that, there could be a lot of concerns for the way you do your business. And auditing is a concern. And this is a very easy one because you would know what you have to be compliant with. You know that you're not allowed to store client credit cards in your system. And then, you have all these compliance, these steps that you have to follow. So when it comes to privacy laws, you have to follow those as well. So if you're a lawyer, you would know this. You would understand all the privacy laws in each province and what to adhere to. Each province has different laws, but you would have to understand that there's PIPEDA and there's PIPA. So for example, in BC, the PIPA Act, you can get fined up to $10,000 per individual, or an organization can get fined up to $100,000. And you go, you get fined over what? Breaking the privacy laws. What would be the privacy laws? Well, surprising enough, the ransomware attacks that occur to these organizations, these criminals get away because they're untraceable. The way they do the type of work they do, they're untraceable. So they can't be found, they can't be caught. It's not like they are a physical person that we can go find because we see their face, we have their identity, we have none of that. But what's happening is that organizations are getting tangled in this because the client data is being compromised. Your client data is being sold to the dark web by these ransomware criminals. And so these clients are compromised and their identity is compromised. And so then the government is now holding you liable. So that's the business cost to you. You now have to look at these laws and go, am I adhering to these properly? Am I keeping client data on? Am I keeping the right client data on file? Am I keeping it on file for the right amount of time? So in securities, like for example, financial advisors, securities, you have to have certain client data for a certain amount of years. Branch managers have their files on, file locking cabinet, and they're not allowed to have anyone have access to those files outside of that branch manager. So if that is compromised, and that's, in this digital world, you have confidential records that are on a software, and that's compromised, you're liable. So you have to realize you need to know what those laws are, how to follow those, and how that actually affects your business, because that's what the true risk is now, is you're liable because of the privacy laws that are at risk with any of that private data stolen. Because usually it would entail someone's SIN number, someone's birthday, someone's full name, someone's address, because that's what happened with the public school system. They had the addresses and SIN numbers. They had real private information about these students. And so that put them at risk. So when you're looking at these, you should look at your province, look at the laws that you have to adhere to and look at the fines because they're high. And then look at what is your organization missing? Where is the gap? And if you have to put new policies in place inside of your organization so that everyone in the company signs it and understands, okay, we don't interact with credit cards at all. So never, ever should we have any credit cards on file. If you have a credit card on file and then you get audited, you could be in serious financial trouble for a fine. And you don't want to have that. Or you keep client files longer than the 7 years and you're just like, well, we forgot about them and we didn't really remember to delete them. We don't have a policy in place where we delete client files after they leave our company or their services are we no longer have they don't use our services anymore. If you don't have anything in place to remove those client files because they're no longer a client, that could put you at risk as well. And you can be audited and the cost could be high, a cost that you wouldn't actually be prepared for and wouldn't even think you would have to be considering. But we're telling you today, these laws are becoming more stringent. They're putting them in place to be effective and to make you liable. So civil lawsuits are very common now. So Life Labs that had a breach a couple of years ago, they went under civil suit and they had to pay out millions of dollars, and they didn't even want to disclose what they had to pay out because it put a bad name with their stakeholders. So you can see it's just a ripple effect of bad news when it comes to these type of consequences. And then if you've heard of GDPR, when you have any business in the EU, like Microsoft does, so they have to adhere to GDPR. They have no choice. And if they don't adhere, they will get fined. So you can get fined up to 4% of your annual worldwide turnover, or 20 million, whatever. So you can go on GDPR website and you can just Google GDPR fines, and they will show a list of all the companies that are in the middle of being fined right now, and they act on those fines. So they will go to Microsoft, find them, Amazon, find them, Google, find them, Facebook, they'll give them a fine, and their fines are huge based on the compromise they put on the way they're tracking client data and the way they're interfacing with client data. They'll find them and they'll make them pay. So Canada wants to follow GDPR because what GDPR has put in place is very effective. It makes these large organizations adhere to protecting you as a client or you as a consumer, protects your privacy, protects your identity, protects your credentials. So when we talk about credentials, Cisco just had a network breach, and it was based on an employee. The employee had their Google account compromised, and that means their username and their email. And not only that, they compromised their multi-factor authentication as well. So we'll talk about multi-factor authentication, because multi-factor authentication is going to be critical in the way you interact with your business. So for example, when we're talking about verifying authentication and authorization, we have to verify your identity. So there's a lot of this stuff you do every day. You're not even thinking twice about it. You log into Office 365, you send in you put your username, you put your password, and in you go. So it's no brainer. You do what you do, you get into your systems and you're off and running. But now we have to look at this on a different approach where we go, okay, so you're verifying identity, you're determining that I'm allowed to get in here because I have permissions to access this Office 365 account, and then I'm in, right? But if this authentication is compromised, then the authorization and access is possibly going to be compromised as well. And so that means it's kind of a chain of events just from this one action alone, and the damage can be pretty significant. So we want to talk about authentication and the devices you use and the layers of protection that you're going to need to put in place. And it is a layered protection model that we believe should be put in place, because then if one thing gets compromised, you have another layer that gets stopped, so that you won't have your company compromised by that one method alone, it'll be stopped by this other layer. So multi-factor authentication, we believe, can block 99% of these automated attacks, because there are a lot of automated attacks. It's not just one human going, okay, I'm going to go breach, this organization and hit everyone inside that organization. No, they're going to do it through different cybersecurity tools that they have access to automate this, so they can just like spray it and attack an organization and see what falls, where the dust settles. So my question to you is, I have this little app, this question for you. So all you have to do is take your phone right now and put your phone and your camera up to that QR code, and it will scan the question. And the question is, how many accounts are enabled with MFA inside of your organization that you use? So just take your phone, put your camera up to that, scan it. And then if you wouldn't mind answering this question for me, I would like you to answer if you have all of your work accounts enabled with multi-factor authentication, or you only have one account enabled with multi-factor, or just a few, or you don't even use it at all. So I'll just wait until everyone populates that, and then you can see the responses as well. And again, this is anonymous. I won't see who's put answer, but what I want to do is I want to get a pulse on where you are at with what you use for multi-factor authentication, like how often you use it. Because sometimes, it's easy to use it with, just, oh, I'll just use it with Office 365, and then I won't use it for anything else. So it looks like 60% use it on multiple work accounts. So that means you're familiar with it. Excellent. So what we have here is 20% work on all work accounts. So that's excellent. I would like to say that for us, we'd like to continue a conversation with you to be able to help move along that everyone in your organization can use multi-factor authentication on all of your accounts. Because you can't just use it on Office 365, and then if you have a CRM like HubSpot, and then don't use it on HubSpot, but you have all your client data in there. That's safe, but HubSpot's not. Or if you have Bamboo and you're using that for your HR hiring needs or your accounting, and you don't have multi-factor authentication on there, then that's very vulnerable to your organization, because it links to your organization. So then you're putting up a layer only partially within your organization. And the way this threat climate is now, that's what hackers can do best. They can find you, find what accounts you're linked to, and then they just topple them down, and they can get inside of all of them. Nothing stops them, because like we say, we're all connected. And so that is the concern. You realize that you aren't segmented from all of these services, you're connected. So that's where using one is awesome, but using it multi-factor in all of your software accounts is critical. So we want to talk about modern multi-factor authentication. So it's been around for a while. And as you know, you've been using it inside your organization. You have to use it for CRA, for example. But we realize it has to be revised. And in this last year, we've realized the hackers have figured out we use MFA. So with us using MFA, they have figured out ways that they can compromise it and trick us. And that's what happened with Cisco. That employee had unfortunately saved his Cisco credentials inside of his Google browser, Chrome browser. So then his Google password was in there, and all a hacker does is compromise that password, and he's in. So then when we look at, he had MFA in place, but what he didn't realize was he wasn't accessing that account at the time, but the hacker had tricked the system, got into it, and was sending it a multi-factor authentication notification to his phone. So that would be by text. So for example, one method is via like a trusted device, like your phone, right? So it can come through text, SSM, and we are familiar with that. But this hacker bombarded this employee, and this employee just went, oh man, okay, and accepted that MFA push, we call it. And then that hacker got inside that organization. So what we're seeing a lot of is that. And so we have to pivot to say, okay, texting was never an authentic, trusted, true, confidential way to be able to verify someone's identity, because now we realize the hackers come in the middle and trick us. So even though you might not have logged into your FedEx account, but you're getting an MFA push, you go, okay, well, that's fine. Instead, now we have to think and put our critical thinking hat on and go, I doubt that's me, since I'm not in a FedEx account right now. I'm not logging to ship anything. Why am I getting an MFA multi-factor authentication push to access that account? Uh-oh, red flag. So then you have to be able to be on the alert, because you have to realize now you're a perfect target. You're a prime target. So what we have to talk about is enforcing it for every identity while using these accounts and these devices for all of your staff. Right? And you can't do this alone. You'll need a company, a managed service provider to help you set this up appropriately, so you can make sure that there's conditional access set up for these trusted devices. You have to set up for trusted location. So for example, you know, if I work out of Alberta and I'm logging in and I'm accessing my device from Alberta, that's fine. But then all of a sudden, if I am, you know, tomorrow in Bulgaria or India, and I'm logging in from there, red flag, right? So we have to have conditional access set up for these devices so we can stop that type of intrusion when it is happening. We have to have geographic restrictions, right? So we know that, okay, we know Sonya is never going to be in India to work. So we can know that we can put in these system requirements so that they can be like, this will be never occurring. We will never allow a staffer to access this device outside of Canada, let's say, because we're not going to allow that. For example, Scotiabank, they won't even allow their staff to use Zoom, like at all. That's how locked down Scotiabank is. So if they have an outside of Scotiabank meeting with anyone who does Zoom, they can only call it in. So you as an organization can determine how you have your access privileges set up for multi-factor authentication so that you can determine what works for your company. But we say, you know, it's something you know, something you have, or something you are, like a fingerprint. Like my computer, I use a fingerprint to log into my computer. So that is a trusted way to log into my computer. We can't have that on every device. We have it on some of our physical devices, but not on the software. So we have to get more creative about how we give access, that other layer of access, and enforce it so that we can make sure that I'm Sonya and I'm logging into our CRM, our HubSpot account, and I can prove it's me. So what we're finding is that's a really good layer to stop hackers in their tracks, because if we do it the right way, it can then keep you working with your flow, keep the intruders out, and then protect your data. So we encourage an authentication app. So Microsoft has one. All of the password managers have them, but I would recommend today that you would consider updating it so you would implement adding that authenticator app and using that as a method to authorize your multi-factor authentication with your software. You'll understand it's easy to enable your multi-factor authentication, but it's how you get that push. And so you can decide and your organization can decide. And you might need help from your managed service provider to do that. And I would recommend you do, because there's other layers around that where you can consider what that looks like and what's best for your organization. And then the other layers is everyone has to have a buy-in. So you being here today is amazing because you're taking initiative to say, I need to understand more. I need to learn more, and I need to understand what I should be doing. And that's incredible because you can be that agent of change to help start some of these implementations inside your organization. They're small steps, but they're steps nonetheless. And we've got to start somewhere. It doesn't mean you have to take all of it and implement it now with all of the costs. You can start with something that would be the most critical benefit to your organization, and then implement that and help your staff get trained in that so that there could be huge buy-in and an easy buy-in. And then you also have to understand, you have to talk to your staff about that role-based access so they understand, okay, I'm a financial controller. I access all the finances, but that person who's working on this project that's just a contractor will never have access to these records unless they have to look at it to do some of their project scope. Then you would give them access, but it would be conditional. You would say, we're going to consider what you get access to, then we're going to give you that permission for a certain amount of time. And then we're going to define what part of that privilege you would get, like how much you would see, what you can do in that. And you probably already do that to some level, where you give editing permissions, commenting permissions, or full permissions. But you have to understand, you have to grant your staff these permissions accordingly so that you can make sure that not every staff has access to everything, because then that means if someone's flippant with all of their credentials, and that means a hacker comes, uses them as the weakest link, gets inside your organization, and they have access to the financial controllers, all of your financial data, then it's a mess, right? It's a big mess. And so Smart Dolphins can help automate those privilege access points for you. And it's really easy if you can have it categorized in a way so that you can say, okay, these are documented, and we can reduce a lot of human error if we can just put everyone in their category. So for example, this is just a sales group permission diagram, right? So you just have the category of sales group. And then if you have a new staffer come in, then you let them add to that category, and that category already determines what files they get to access and nothing else, what they get to see and nothing else. So some of you will be very familiar with this because this is probably what you do. You may set this up all the time, but we have to make sure that we do this for every staff and for every type of confidential document. So we have to make sure we put them in groups so we can keep our security strong to protect all of the documents and all the data so that everyone knows what access they have. Because I mean, I don't do anything with finances. Why would I ever want to access finances? Because then that means I could get myself in trouble just because I wouldn't handle that properly, possibly protect it possibly. And it's just not good housekeeping, right? It just limits the damage by protecting every staff to give them the right permissions. So privilege access management is one term we also use, and that there's lots of different types of software out there that help implement privilege access. But at the end of the day, you just put it into your user group, and that group can be, whatever categories you determine is important. But if you don't have this in place, I recommend you talk to Smart Dolphins and figure out how to start this in place. That will really mitigate a lot of cyber incidents, vulnerabilities, or just possible concerns for your data loss inside of your organization. So it's a bit complicated, and I can't go into too much detail about this, but there's more we can talk about offline if you need to understand this in greater detail. But this is really important, and we believe in the security world, this is one huge way to mitigate risk inside of your organization, and making sure that everyone has access to the right information, documents, files, and for the right amount of time or privilege. So when we talk about layered security, when human, we have the audit, we have automation, and we have documentations. When you have to review that, sometimes it might require you to put policies in place, get everyone educated on that so they understand this is the new way of doing things. Don't be surprised, it's not personal, but that's important for you to do this so you can create this. but automating this user creation and permission assignments will help reduce that human error. And so, talk to Smart Dolphins to get more information on what that looks like. But those clearly documented user rules will help ensure management and your IT are in sync when it comes to all that authorization, so that when a staff does leave, then all you do is just turn off that access, and then they would lose. Then you don't have to change anything about the access to the group. You just remove that person, and those files are protected and safe because you've just removed access for that person. So if you have these automations in place, it could really save you a really huge headache as well, based on new staff and staff that do leave. And it's really important that you document this so that everyone understands how that works. And we also encourage single sign-on. And I don't know how many of you use single sign-on, but when you look at this image, you can see, as we're talking about passwords, and if staff has 100 passwords in their life, and then they have maybe 10 inside of their organization, how can a staffer want to remember 10 passwords, right? So as an organization, you have to have this, you could have this one identity, and you could have a single sign-on, so that, the IT or the whoever's managing the setup of these accounts isn't putting all these passwords in an Excel spreadsheet to say, okay, Mary just joined the team and I'm giving her this password, because that's at risk as well. If you're keeping a password protected Excel sheet on your Google Drive or on your desktop or in your C drive, it's really risky because it can be found. It could be, you could be audited and you can be in trouble. And then you could also get blamed because your staff would go, well, he has it, he kept it on file, and everyone could be pointing fingers. So we need to find ways to automate this so you can set up staff with ease of access to all of the applications they use. And single sign-on is one of them. It just really allows us to connect to many accounts through one single log on, and Microsoft provides that, which is really nice. Since you already may use all of the Microsoft suite of products, you can implement that single sign-on, and then you can protect your organization. And just the weariness of staff going, okay, I have another password, no, I have another password. This can really allow your staff not to be so fatigued by all of these protocols and procedures that allow your company to be safe. And we really want to consider the fact that we know ease of use is important, but we know security is critical. So between the two, we want to look at how do we make this great for our staff, so we're not exhausting them with all these new security protocols. And that does mean automating. It just does. It's unfortunate, but the way that we are operating, we aren't going to have passwords go away anytime soon. They want them. I mean, trust me, this is in discussion all the time. How can we get rid of passwords? Well, single sign-on is one way to reduce the password fatigue. However, it's not going away. We aren't replacing it with anything magical. So until that happens, we have to follow protocols that can help us manage our business needs every day without putting our business at risk. And we have to step up to the plate to be able to fight against and combat against these type of incidences that are occurring to our organizations, and then protecting our staff as well. We don't want our staff to be disregarding password management procedures, but it's just exhausting to follow them. So we have to make this ease of access manageable. And we also want to know, we want them to know, like, we want them to do their best work, but we also need them to follow the best protocols so that the company can be protected from government, the laws, and the attackers that are just finding new ways all the time to breach inside of our organizations. And this is unfortunate. It's constantly happening. So when we talk about zero knowledge, we really do think that this is a direction that every organization should go. And it's a really tough one, because it just means you have to put up a lot of things in your network to set up, to protect your staff, to protect your network, to protect your applications. But at the end of the day, we want you just to start with some of these simple steps today in the next month or two so that you can figure out how this flows and you can be an agent of change to understand how this looks, right? But a password manager also helps store those passwords for your staff. So you can set up password manager for your company and get everyone to implement that, do a little bit of training, and then that takes away that password fatigue of even remembering the company passwords that they have to remember, that they have to have complicated, because, you know, our password management has to be complicated. So under NIST strategies, they're saying you have to have 12 characters long, you have to have it complex, you have to have a randomly generated password. So who's going to do this? So a password manager will help do that. So if you implement that for your staff, then they can follow that guideline with ease, and then they can store it and not have to remember their passwords. And then if you do have some kind of incident, let's say one of your applications was compromised and you see a alert that's been given to you by that organization, or your accounts have been compromised, because I think you should be prepared for that. It's not really a matter of it's not going to happen to you. You have to be prepared for it to happen to you. So even if it's one software application that's compromised and you have some data in there, what will you do? Well, the first thing is, obviously, you have to make sure everyone changes their password, but then there's a bunch of other steps that you have to put in place. So that business continuity piece has to be considered as well. But, you know, this little image of employees reuse their passwords an average of 13 times. I wouldn't be surprised if it's higher. Same Facebook account for your Microsoft Office, for your Bamboo, for your, it's easy to do. So I wouldn't say that your employees want to be negligent. They just want a path of ease. So if they make mistakes, it's not because they're doing it to be disrespectful or disregard company policy. It may be because they don't know. It may be that they don't understand. And all of these pieces are critical for back to the point of protecting the human firewall and training the human firewall, which is every staff member on your team. They're as valuable as every single member is valuable because they bring a valuable piece to the organization and they touch valuable data and they do valuable work. So educating them to the ability so they can truly understand it, then that will benefit your organization. And then if they don't understand it, giving them ease to be able to tell you, I don't understand what you mean by this, what's required of me. So then you can continue that conversation and they can actually act upon that and not feel like they're in trouble. Because these attackers are more sophisticated than your staff. They're more sophisticated than your CEO. They're more sophisticated than your software. So you're up against some serious adversaries here that know more about attacking your business system than you do. So you have to understand you can only do so much. Digital software is always going to be vulnerable in one way or another, but you can do some things that matter and that can make a difference to protect the bare needs of your company from these type of incidences. So when we talk about device identities, well, this is interesting because lots of people might not realize how they work with their devices. Do you have 2 devices you work from and you do work on? Do you have 3 devices you do your work on? Well, within an organization, that can put your company at a greater risk because those you might have given your staff 1 approved device to work on, but instead they are working on their husband's laptop because they're on vacation in Mexico and we only wanted to bring 1 laptop, but we both want to work. So there's lots of complexities of how this can unfold where you might not have a policy in place or procedures in place so staff know that you are only allowed to work on 1 device and manage the data on that 1 device, because you're going to set up that device securely, but you're not going to set up this, that person's spouse's device securely. So this has to be a conversation that these staff understand. They are using the managed devices given to them and they're set up securely so the data can be on there securely. You have to actively define those protections for that data. And then if they're going to work on unmanaged devices, you have to have that conversation as well, because that means your data is unprotected if they're going to go transfer documents work on documents on unmanaged protected device. You're going to have to require encryption, PIN numbers. You're going to have to also replace and protect unpatched devices. So that has to be in place. That can't be taken lightly. So if a computer has an end of life, what do you have in place to protect your organization so that is destroyed properly? If a software needs to be patched, is that in place that you do that all the time? Because I mean, I did 3 updates this week alone on my device. Is it a pain? Yes, it is a pain, but it was critical. I did it as soon as it came out. I'm not wasting any time. It does waste my time, but it's critical because the outcome is, it is for a reason. It's to protect your device or protect your software that is on that device. So we can't negotiate it. So this is just the cost of us doing business every day. And we are now in this digital world. We have to play the game of adjusting accordingly and stepping up to the plate. So on that note, I want to take a few minutes to talk about a couple things. I want us to discuss a few things further. I'm wondering at your next team meeting, if you can start a conversation about how to be a change agent for security, to think about what that would look like for you. I would like to understand how you would take more steps to add authentication and authorization layers to your organization. I would like to ask if you have a good understanding of your employer passwords, like what are they doing to navigate that? Or do you have, or do you want to consider setting up SSO? And have you evaluated what you have in for multi-factor authentication? Does it need updating? Is it up to date, or have you set it up like 5 years ago or 6 months ago and it needs to be revised? And then your privacy policies. So I would like to bring this to the table and discuss a few of these things before we run out of time. Just a couple minutes, I'm sorry, but I would like to be able to chat a bit more. There are some questions possibly.
Yeah, Carlos and I have been chatting, and yeah, I think that was fantastic. Lots of thoughts. I know we're short on time, so I probably won't be able to share all of them. But Carlos mentions, that yes, it's very important for companies of all sizes to be putting resources toward cybersecurity and identity security, but it's expensive and it requires expertise, and both of those are true. And I think it's only becoming more important over time. And the lowest hanging fruit, or the easiest companies to victimize, typically are becoming those small and medium businesses, because they tend to not have this expertise internally. They don't have a chief technology officer to lead these things. They don't have the technicians to implement them and maintain them and keep them modern. And so the hard truth there, I think, is that for many companies, it means allocating more revenue than they have in the past, and that may be difficult, but I think the responsibilities and risks are changing, and that just that's just going to mean, I think, making this a priority, and then that may be challenging, but the risks are I think simply too high not to. So yeah, not easy for everybody, but certainly even just starting to talk about it, with your management and leadership, is a good first step. And then figuring out, what can you do. You may not be able to get to a 10 out of 10, in 2 months. It may not be perfect, but getting it, into your leadership conversations is at least a start.
Yeah, creating a budget, small as it may be, and tackling one challenge this year can alleviate you being a vulnerable organization. So you determine which one of those you could tackle. And I would say, the single sign-on concept or multi-factor, where it's a company-wide, would be great first steps. And you can have that conversation, strategize about it, and then come to the table with Smart Dolphins and talk about how that would look and how that could get implemented slowly but surely. But it's one step, and that would make a huge difference inside of your organization today.
If you're a BC-based business and you get a chance to attend Any talks with Michael McAvoy? He's the I forget the position of executive director or president of the Office of the Information Privacy Commissioner, BC. I've been to a couple, very interesting, but they talk a lot about how they apply fines and such to businesses that have breaches. And a big thing that they look at is due diligence, right? They don't tell you exactly what to do. They don't tell you exactly how long your passwords need to be or exactly what MFA authentication tool that you need to use. But they look at whether or not you are making an effort, right? And if you're doing as much as you can and you're making progress and you're making it a priority, even if that might not be as great as some other companies, that due diligence or the effort towards due diligence, that will count in most cases. If you do suffer a breach, you want to be able to show that, that you're working toward making things more secure if you're maybe not quite as mature as other companies. So definitely recommend them as a resource, just to sort of get an idea of like what the climate is and what the consequences can be. And that helps just, I think, add some encouragement if maybe the topic is challenging among leadership.
And so for question number 4, I was just wondering if I could get some feedback from everybody. When you look at evaluating your multi-factor to the modern standards, besides budget, what would be one of the greatest challenges for you to start looking at that as a team today? Can I get anyone to give me some feedback? And again, this isn't this isn't about anybody's status of anyone's organization, because trust me, every organization is in this same boat. If it's not multi-factor authentication, it's identity access management, or it's data storage, or it's incident response recovery, or it's business continuity. Every organization has gaps and challenges. It's just a matter of how are they facing those challenges. So under multi-factor authentication, for you, what would you say would be your answer? Do I have anybody that would be takers on answering that?
Terry says user acceptance. Absolutely, we see that. Yes, yeah, that can be a difficult one. I think there was one slide where we said that MFA should be enforced for everyone, even that one user, like especially that one user that doesn't want to do it. That can be difficult. Part of it is carrot and part of it is stick. The cultural change. You need to work towards buy-in, but then you also just need to force it upon people is the reality. It's part of working for your company. It's an expectation. It's kind of like if you're a trucking company, your employees are all going to wear their seatbelts, and if they're not, you're going to fire them because it's too big of a risk. It's really that. It needs to be black and white.
And truly, that's where we're at. This is the climate we're in. And if you could see the stats, I could bombard you with stats and visuals on the cost that organizations are facing with these type of breaches, and then the litigations and the shareholder, stakeholder, the business loss, the business people going out of businesses, the whole gamut. It should be non-negotiable, and soon enough, it will be a business cost that everyone will take seriously. And I understand what you're saying, Terry, about your decision makers go, well, it's just not in the budget, or it's too much effort. But at the end of the day, when you look at the cost of a breach or the cost of a cyber incident, this is way cheaper, way cheaper.
Yeah, and that's and you're right, Terry. And in some cases, and we've seen this as well, where it doesn't necessarily come top down. We've had mid-level managers that have become advocates within their organizations and helped encourage a decision maker to come to a session like this, or encourage them to go to like an Office of the Information Privacy Commissioner session, and help to educate them, letting them know like what's going on out there, what other companies are seeing, what these breaches actually look like, and that may take some effort. I definitely would encourage anybody who's struggling with that in their organization with leadership to make noise. It's tough, but it can be done.
It is. So if you would like to continue getting more information from Smart Dolphins, please communicate with us offline, because we want to be able to support you in getting some of these steps implemented for your organization. And it shouldn't be pushing a rock uphill, but sometimes it is. So you can get some support from us with you needing some more documentation, some more backup, some more stats, whatever it would be to help you have a better understanding to bring that conversation to the table. And I know it takes time, but at the end of the day, you can start the conversation so that you can move that rock uphill slowly but surely, so that we can support you in that direction that you need to go to protect your data, protect your company, protect your people, protect your clients, all of it for the greater good of also saving you money. Even though it costs you a little bit of money at the front end, it saves you money.